Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the Off the Cushion podcast. Offering simplified teachings from Chan Buddhism and other traditions, Off the Cushion seeks to make meditation accessible to practitioners of all backgrounds and skill levels, helping you to find peace wherever life takes you. I'm Samper Vazana. I'm here with Dwayne Rester. How are you doing, Dwayne?
I'm very good. Welcome, everyone.
Great. The topic for today's podcast is we're calling it equanimity, but I think there's a lot to unpack from that. But we'll just start off saying equanimity. How do you think is the best way for us to introduce that topic?
I think we're in a period of very different opinions. If you were to take this last election and the run up to it, it definitely pointed out to us there's a group of people who think one way, and there's a group of people who think of how things should be in another way. And the topic of equanimity means that how can we approach these very different ways of life, opinions, in a more balanced way, and still be peaceful human beings that don't get drugged down by depression, are agitated in a very aggressive way, because neither of those approaches are helpful to humanity. So we're hoping that we can at least provide some ideas for finding some a peaceful space in your day and your life, moment to moment, depending on where you live and who you deal with. And I'm sure we all have friends and coworkers and relatives that come from both sides of what is a very divided nation here in the United States. But these things are also true throughout the world. If you really looked at social, political situations in other places. How can we bridge the divide for ourselves and hopefully so that we're not contributing to this heightened emotional world that we're in?
Really good way of putting it. I Equanimity, for those of us who have been around Buddhist circles for a while, is a very prevalent term, one that's used often in different circumstances. And one thing I want to bring up is something that Guogu often says in relation to wandering thoughts, that when you're engaged in meditative practice and you have different thoughts, sometimes they're good thoughts, sometimes they're bad thoughts, sometimes they're neutral thoughts. And one thing that he has said is that the way that we relate to those thoughts while we're meditating is the way we relate to everything else in that happens around us in the world, which is why meditation is such a great place to practice our experience of how we relate to wandering thoughts as that translates to our daily lives. So, just to give you an example, if I'm in my meditation practice and I think, oh, I forgot to, I don't know, uh, buy lettuce for tonight's salad. Probably just kind of a neutral thought. And, I can either let that go or continue with my meditation practice. But if I'm meditating and then what comes to mind is the election that just happened, and I'm filled with outrage, or I'm filled with fear, or I'm filled with disgust, or any of these sort of like really strong emotions, you better believe that those reactions I have while meditating are also happening as I'm engaging with people or seeing things or watching CNN or Fox News or whatever, or even just an image or a sound or something related to the election or to politics or to elected officials or any of those things. My whole day can be ruined by gravitating towards this reaction that I'm having that seems like it's external to me, but this is actually an internal process. It's something I think about, or some memory that I have, or some wiring that predisposes me towards anger, distress, depression, what have you. And that's not to say that these aren't valid emotions to have given circumstances, absolutely. But if we're going to be led about around by the nose by these emotions and these reactions in our own minds, guess what's happening at all times throughout the day with all the different stimuli that we have? And so cultivating a sense of equanimity towards our own thoughts is the first step towards not only finally finding peace within our daily lives, but also developing a sense of how we can be present with action towards any of those emotions that we have. That if we feel anger or we feel distressed, how do we actually participate in resolving whatever's causing that without necessarily being led around by our emotions all the time?
It's a good point. And um, it's in Zen or Chan, it's very necessary to have an understanding or remembering that meditation is not something that is separate from our daily lives. Um, as Sam was saying, that is, if we're sitting in meditation and we have a wandering thought, we could have different levels of wandering thought, like, oh, I got to remember about lettuce. But then what do you do in meditation is you come right back to whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. Let's say it's you're meditating on the breath. By coming back to your point of focus, you're not allowing the mind to run wild because let's say it's, well, I forgot lettuce. Well, I forgot lettuce because, the car didn't have gas in the car. I had to run to the gas station. And, my wife and I, we've had this conversation, blah, 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 blah. And then you go on with this long, drawn out story for 5, 10, 15 minutes over the reason you forgot to buy lettuce. So it's not that we tamp down a thought and say in an aggressive way, but we just recognize that one, we don't have to be controlled by this thought, controlled meaning that it spins off into other thoughts, into narratives, but then we bring it back to what we're doing. Because with any of those kinds of changes in our mental continuum, we then have emotional and physical reactions to those. And as Sam had pointed out, that if it's something that's really aggravating us, it's like, well, gosh, what happens? I run this large farm. I don't, but we run this large farm, and I'm going to lose all of my workers because they're all going to be massively deported, and blah, 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 blah. And all this goes through our minds. And we become very angry. And maybe we carry that into daily life. And we're in this constant anxiety toward the future, and being led by fears of the past, and we're not present. A meditation practice helps us to become what's happening right now, not what's going to happen in the future, not what's going to happen in the past or has happened in the past, but what's happening right now. And so how does this build toward equanimity? That we recognize all of these thoughts that we have as exactly what they are. They're just inputs into the brain, because we've actually done that to ourselves, and we get spun out of control, and we're not peaceful. And so when we interact with others, we're bringing that with us, and they're probably bringing their stuff too. And if we're in like-minded, then we're great. We pat ourselves on the back that we've solved the world problems, and we've all got angry, and we've then started drinking or whatever. But we're none of us are present what's actually happening. Now, that does not deny that we need to do things, if we can, to prevent terrible things from happening. We can do what we can do, but at least in our social political system, we've pretty much done what we can do. We voted, and we get to vote again, and we can say, well, let me do this. But what can we do to help one another? And this is where a practice of being at peace or equanimity. Equanimity means balance, that you're balanced. Neither you find balance in things that make you sad. You find balance in things that make you angry. And you just say, well, those things are not actually happening to me right now. Even if they did happen to me in the past, maybe they'll be different in the future. But right now, I'm going to stay right where I'm at. I'm equal. I'm balanced. I'm at peace. And how is that done? This is not a reminder to ourselves. We do this in our meditation practice by simply coming back to whatever it is we're doing. Even if you're going for a walk on the beach, like that beach that there's behind some, and if you would just enjoy the cool air, hearing the waves, the cool sand on your bottom of your feet, and just be there. Again, it's not an escape. This is to train our minds.
That's a
So
great point.
Zen and Chan is actually a very serious practice. This isn't some, hippie nonsense to make you feel better. No, this is to train yourself as a grown adult how to handle things without being pulled away by your own fear or your own anxiety or your own anger. None of that does any of us good.
It's a great, excellent point that it's not an escape, given that you might think that look at climate change, right? We might think that climate change is real. We might know that climate change is real based on the data that's been presented, and we might be meditating and get sucked into that and anger at those who say that it's not real or whatever the thought process is that one might get into, which are understandable emotions. But if we get pulled by that, then we're really not doing our job as a meditator. And I like this term that you use sometimes when one gets pulled away by different thoughts, when the mind moves essentially.
Mind move.
Something that you say in addition to the mind moves is there I go again. It's like
Yeah,
just noticing like, oh yeah, there I go. That's just the chattering brain. Yes, it feels more important this time. Yes, it feels like the whole world is coming to an end because of climate change, but also I've made a commitment to return to my meditation practice so that I can have more equanimity towards all different thoughts, towards all different feelings and emotions, towards all people and situations. So I need to return to my meditation practice. But this is not an escape. This is not tamping down the emotion or saying that it's not valid or ignoring climate change.
right.
It's just putting us in a different frame where we're not so attached to the feelings that we have and the emotions, the reactions that we have, so that we can actually address what needs to happen without acting based on emotion. Why this is important, and this is, I think, the key point when people have difficulty experiencing compassion or saying, "How can I have equanimity with a political candidate that I find reprehensible? How can I find compassion for someone who votes for them uh, or is voting against my rights?" It's a great question. And the key point for me from a Buddhist perspective is understanding causes and conditions.
Right.
We don't really have time today to go into that, but we can just basically say that within a Buddhist cosmology, it's understood that everything has a cause and a condition to arise. So, like a plant, a tree, the cause is the seed, but the seed doesn't do anything unless it has the right conditions, which means soil, sunlight, rain, so on and so forth. If we look at a voter like a blue state voter versus a red state voter, we might think that inherently I'm a progressive liberal person because that's just the way that I am. And maybe that's true, but also it could have to do with where I live, my level of education, the people that I surround myself with, my family background, my access to um, different media outlets. Maybe I only have one media outlet that I watch or listen to. And so when I start to pull the onion layers back, I see that I actually, the way that I believe, the way that I am, is a product of everything that's around me, everything that has conspired to create the person that I am right now. And if I look 10 years ago, maybe I didn't even have the same views then. This is based on causes and conditions. So if I can see that I am changeable, malleable, I can also see that others are that way. And that opens the door for me to have even the slightest amount of compassion to say, like, this person is not doing right, is not uh, um, voting in the way that I want them to vote, is not promoting wellness for others the way that I would have them do. This person is actively working against me. But maybe there's a tiny bit of compassion where I can see if I were in the same position and had the same upbringing, the same race, the same gender, the same whatsoever, would I do things differently? And we could say, yeah, maybe I would do things differently because I'm inherently, progressive or liberal or however we want to conceive ourselves. Um, But more often than not, we'll develop a little bit of sense of empathy towards even people that like we find against again the most reprehensible. And that's the open door to understand how to have more equanimity towards all people and all feelings and emotions, but also how to more positively affect change. So we're not feeding into this cycle of us versus them, of a binary positioning or a two-party political system. How do we enrich the lives of everyone around us, not just the people that we like?
It's a very good point, and I'm glad you went down that road of causes and conditions and tied it to compassion. Is a word you'll hear in Buddhism often. Um, you know, there's basically kind of three levels of understanding others. There's you have sympathy for a person, which means like, yeah, that kind of sucks what the position they're in. Um, Empathetic response is I understand where they're in because I've been there. I see them through my own experiences. Um, Compassion is that I understand how they got there through causes and conditions, and I want to help them if I can by either not adding more fuel to the fire, i.e., we're at peace, or if they want to explore how do I untie myself, how do I disentangle, then we could help people with saying, well, here's what I do. Here's how I find a little peace in not getting stuck in my head, in my story, in my narrative. Here's how I practice this continuously. Once you have had an awakening experience, doesn't mean you're done. It just means you've finally seen through how all of these different backgrounds, like Sam was describing, can lead a person to think and act into a particular way. And so, if you also, like, say, for people who program computers, I don't, but anybody that understands software understands that things are put in a certain order. And in that certain order, if you put this in on this end, you're going to get this on that end. And that's the same thing with human beings. And it has in our software, bit is thoughts, and thoughts that are added to, and then they're filtered through experience. They're filtered through memory, which is, we could talk for hours on the fault of all those things. I always like to give examples of illusions, optical illusions, and how we will swear something looks a particular way. And then when we look at it from a different perspective, um, it's not what we thought it was. And guess what? That's how everything is that we encounter. It is not the way we think it is. That is
Yes.
only our programming, only our conditioning. And again, going back to what is the purpose of meditation, this all sounds very philosophical. It means that when you're doing what you're doing and you're focusing on the breath and you come back to that, you're going to rewire your brain. You're not going to continue to operate through your programming. That's equanimity in that sense. It has all these other things tied into it with causes and conditions and all these other things and interesting really interesting if you study modern neuroscientists. I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a carpenter. But if you study these things, this is the way it's being mapped out now. It's like you put this in, here's what's going to come out. And that thing is thoughts. Don't believe everything that you think. Question everything, which is a practice of equanimity in its own sense. That it's not that you're being skeptical and just don't buy into anything. But know that you're just like, well, okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I don't really take it that way, but there's another argument, like, well, if they deport everybody, then we're going to pay more for tomatoes. Yeah, but if you're willing to do that, are you willing to go out there and work those fields? Well, no. Okay, but also, if they're getting paid nothing, then is even that fair? Should we be paying more for tomatoes right now, or is it just convenience, causes and conditions? So that disentanglement from ideas, um, hopefully will open our eyes for new possibilities. And maybe that's where we go with this, is new realistic possibilities of where we can go in the future. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's great. I think, well, I'm going to ask you
Mhm.
about a way that we can practice this, incorporate this into our daily practice. But just want to put a finer point under. Sometimes there's the question that comes up. People are doing silent illumination or other types of meditation, and they say, "Well, how do I overcome these wandering thoughts? I just have so many thoughts all the time, and I just can't get any peace." And this is part of it, but I think loving kindness practice is one of the best ones for developing equanimity towards people and towards thoughts. And if you're not familiar with it, you can refer to an earlier episode of ours about loving kindness,
Right.
because it really trains us to lean into the idea that even the thoughts that the reason why we have these wandering thoughts and they don't go away is because we're repressing them. We don't want to have those thoughts, right? The wandering thoughts are bad. And that's why there's a problem. But if we develop a different relationship through loving kindness or there are other methods, then it's not so big of a deal anymore.
Right.
Because what we're doing is returning to the method. But want to invite you to give us just off the cuff a way that we can practice equanimity in our daily lives.
I think we have to start with, I often talk about curiosity, um, uh, with a foundation of not knowing. Let me um, let me dissect that a little bit. By not knowing, it doesn't mean that we're blissfully ignorant. Not knowing means being comfortable with being uncertain about things. Um, Curiosity is kind of the fuel to that, meaning that, I really don't know what tomorrow's going to be like, but I can't wait to see how it turns out. I don't know what a month is going to be from now, but I really look forward to seeing what's going to come out. And, but if we layer on, this is the way it must be, it has to be this way, then we're building up an expectation that may not be realistic. And we're also clouding ourselves with opening up possibilities of how things may actually turn out. So what does this mean? Um, I'll give, an example. For before I retired a couple of years ago, I was in the construction industry, and a lot of new homes. I had my thing that I did, which was putting in floors and also build some cabinetry. And I've experienced building my own house and all this other kind of thing. But when you're in a brand new house and it's being built, just take this to, you're at a job and you have this program that must be done. And you have your piece that you're doing. With equanimity, you go in and say, okay, here's what I'm supposed to be doing, and I have this time period that needs to be done. And then yet there may be other people that are also in that same area. They've got things they get done. Well, if we go in there with blinders to think that we're the only one working on this, and just what we're doing, that's the only thing that's important. We're already walking into that with um, we're not realistic. One. And two, we're going to create conflict because we're not acknowledging that other people are involved with this project. And so you create conflict. If everybody else is kind of thinking the same way that you are, what does conflict beget? Um, More conflict.
Yeah.
And then it's whoever can yell the loudest or whatever, whoever's got the biggest push. And so then people get bullied around, and then do things actually happen that efficiently or effectively? Probably not. It's probably always a chase of, the one person that's the most difficult, because we never really learned how to deal with people like that. And in my life, I had to deal with that kind of stuff all the time. And there would be people that want to bully their way in. And I would just have a conversation with them, but I wouldn't get excited and in tone of voice, just like I'm speaking now. It's like, okay, what do you got to get done? All right, well, I've got this period here to get done. Um, If I did this and you came back on this day, would that work? Trying to find compromise. But if we meet people with our own fear, anxiety, and anger that's in us, that's what's going to come back to us. But I found, and this is 25 years in this environment, that I found if I met people with peace and with an equal and balanced attitude and interactions, that's what I got met back with.
That's wonderful.
So
Thank you.
that's, and so, kind of look at it from that way. It's like if I go in with my narrative, this the conjunction of thoughts, and I don't see any other thing except what I got to get done because I got to pay this bill and blah, blah, blah. And I'm bringing all this garbage. It's true. It may be true, but guess what? So does everybody else.
Yeah.
But if we're going through and try to bulldoze our way through life, all we're going to meet is other bulldozers.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that. That's great.
yeah, so try to, maybe find out how that can work in your life. But again, this is a recognition that we are operating out of our own conditioning, our own programming, our own beliefs, ideas, expectations, assumptions, and we are actually blind to what's actually happening. And oftentimes you'll hear this in Buddhism. It's like, we wanting things to be different than they actually are. Well, is this actually are something mystical? No, it's nothing mystical. It's just that it's how things are, whether you were there or not. Just like those waves on the beach back there. Doesn't matter if you recognize them when you're walking down the beach. The waves are still going to be there.
Mm,
And so, you kind of then take out your own personal commitment to something or personal idea. You still need to get it done, but life goes on with you or without you. So why bring all of that into that moment? Just do what you need to do and not get carried away by your own narratives, which is a word we'll use often. So I'm sure
that's
there's
great.
better poetry to it, but
That's great.
that,
We've used the term, and the feeling of curiosity in previous episodes too, so that fits in really well.
yeah. I want to speak a little bit about that. And again, what I mean by curiosity is like just this. It is really the fuel to questioning everything. Just to like, can I see actually more in what's happening? Because I guarantee you, if you go into life like that with everything, you will see more. You'll hear more, especially when you're dealing with others. Because if you've tamping down all your baloney and you can actually hear the word, the feeling, the emotions behind what that other person is actually saying. They're not actually having to mask more of it with more emotion, more excitement. You actually hear purity. And in nature is a good example to go out there because nature is not going to contend with you, and unless you get drug off by an alligator or something.
Right.
Um, but the alligators just doing what alligators do,
That's
and
right.
just kind of look at it like that without your own personal opinion. Yeah, you have to have that in order to navigate. You can't forget how to drive. But if you're driving an old beat up Datsun, it's not a Lamborghini. It is
Yeah.
what it is.
Maybe we all work like that a bit better. Thank you, Dwayne. Um, that's great. So I think that'll do for today's episode on equanimity. Of course, there are more resources on our channel if you'd like to check them out. And I'd like to thank you very much for tuning into the Off the Cushion podcast. You can please like and subscribe for more. And you can also leave us a comment or a question. We really appreciate those. And you can, if you'd prefer to send us feedback, we have an email address, which is offthecushionpodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thank you, Dwayne.
See you next time.
All
Bye.
right.